Crimes against children represent some of the worst atrocities that humans carry out against each other. But even within this realm, there are some crimes which are so brutal and so horrific that they defy comprehension. This is Alec Malcolm's story, and it's about as appalling as they come. Alex was born in 2011 to Lilia Brihar and Leroy Malcolm in London, England. Alex's mum, Lilia, was a Ukrainian immigrant who left her country behind for the promise of a better life. His father, Leroy, had 3 boys when Alex arrived into their lives. Unfortunately, the relationship between Lilia and Leroy wasn't set to last, and by the time Alex was 5, they were separated. Leroy saw Alex occasionally while Lilia did her best as a single mum. She worked 2 jobs to provide for her son, including dog minding and babysitting for friends and neighbours. Alex was the apple of his mother's eye, and her whole world revolved around him. He was a gentle and affectionate boy who loved flowers and cuddles. He was also a good-looking child, and Lilia frequently signed him up for modelling opportunities, which provided a little extra income for necessities. After his parents broke up, Alex often told his mum that he wanted them to all live together again as a family. This is a fairly common desire for many children who have been caught up in the messy space between their parents' separation. But Alex had more reasons than most to want a reconciliation. You see, his mum's new boyfriend was Marvin Ionecho, and Marvin wasn't a good guy. Ever since he had come into Alex's life, things had changed, and not for the better. In many true crime stories, it's easy to say no one could have foreseen what came next. But the reality of this story is that many people could have predicted what was about to happen, and no one did a damn thing. It was a cool autumn evening in November 2016 when Marvin decided he needed to see a friend on the other side of town. He was responsible for his partner's 5-year-old son Alex at the time, so the two set off together into the dusk. CCTV footage captured the pair on their journey across the city. It took 3 buses and a short walk for them to get close to their destination. CCTV cameras lost sight of the pair as they walked through Mountsville Park in Hither Green. The accounts of what happened next differ slightly. According to some passers-by, young Alex ran off into the underbush to chase a fox. Others recall he took off towards the playground. Either way, when he emerged a few moments later, he tearfully told Marvin that he had lost one of his shoes. Rather than comforting Alex or even scolding him, Marvin replied harshly, "You're a f***ing joke." Witnesses would later describe what they heard next as being similar to the noise made when someone throws a metal item into a skip. Others would say it sounded like 2 men fighting, but these weren't 2 men, and there was no trash involved. These were the sounds of a man beating the life out of a 5-year-old boy. When Alex had told Marvin he had lost his shoe, the man picked him up and thrashed his body against the metal fence in the park. The little boy repeatedly sobbed and said he was sorry, but Marvin didn't stop the attack until Alex was unconscious. Once he was done with the brutal assault, Marvin didn't go for help. Instead, he threw Alex's limp body over his shoulder and got into a taxi. This is despite Lewisham Hospital being just a 5-minute walk from the park. At around the same time, Lilia had arrived home and realised that Marvin and Alex weren't there. It was around 6:30 p.m. and dark outside, which immediately made Lilia anxious. She had left Marvin in charge of Alex while she was out, which she did often when she was called out to work. So she rang her partner to find out where they were. She would later say that Marvin sounded calm on the phone, and he told her they were on their way home. He told her that Alex had lost his shoes but said nothing was wrong. Lilia was concerned about the weather because it was cold outside, so she told Marvin to bring her son home right now and to make sure he picks him up and holds him. When she asked to speak to Alex, Marvin refused to put him on the phone. Minutes later, Marvin ran into her house with Alex over his shoulder. Lilia knew immediately that something was wrong with her little boy. "I saw him holding Alex like a baby. He had no shoe, and I just started screaming the moment I saw Alex. Alex was unconscious and his face looked disgusting. He had bruises all over his face and it was disgusting." That's when she realised that Marvin had hurt her baby. "I kept shouting at him, 'What have you done to my son? What happened to him?' every second he would be saying different things. The first time he said something like Alex was standing next to him, telling him that his head hurts, and all of a sudden he fainted and he thought he was pretending. Just seeing what state Alex was in, I knew he hit him, and I know whatever he did it premeditated. Lilia attempted to call an ambulance, but then Marvin turned on her. He grabbed her by the shoulder and kneed her in the chest before wrapping his hands around her throat. I couldn't breathe in, I couldn't breathe out, and there was just a few seconds left, and I knew I wasn't going to last. I just remember those last moments looking at Alex. Finally, Marvin let go of her neck, but he continued to beat her, and he shouted, "Keep your f***ing mouth shut." He carried on his violent attack until neither mother nor son were in any position to call for help. When Lilia was able to move, he made her run a bath to wash Alex because he had wet his pants during the initial assault. When the bath didn't wake the boy up, he wrapped him in a towel, but nothing he did made any difference, and Alex did not regain consciousness. Finally, 2.5 hours after Alex was beaten in the park, Lilia managed to get out a call for help. By then, Alex's lips and extremities had begun to turn blue. Marvin agreed to let Lilia call the paramedics, but he warned her that if she told officers what had happened, he would kill her. Alex was transported to hospital, where he was immediately put on life support. Medical professionals rushed to administer life-saving treatment to reduce the inflammation in his head, but the damage was too severe. 2 days after the attack, Alex died in hospital. His autopsy revealed that Alex had received at least 8 life-threatening blows directly to his head. He had 22 areas of bruises across his entire body and an internal abdominal impact injury. His cause of death was severe bleeding on the brain. Marvin was immediately arrested and charged with murder. It was only after Alex's death that Lilia found out exactly who Marvin was and who she had been leaving Alex alone with. Just 6 months before Alex's murder, Marvin had been released from prison after committing a string of brutal attacks against his ex-partners. His record is shocking. In 2001, he punched his 19-year-old girlfriend and he struck another with a hammer. In 2010, he beat his partner with a saucepan with such force that he dented the pan. He then dragged her around the kitchen by her hair and stamped on her face because she wouldn't let him borrow her car. He also beat the woman's 13-year-old son after he came to her defense. In 2012, he punched a girlfriend until she was unconscious because she refused to lend him her phone. The assault left the woman with a broken jaw. In 2013, he choked another partner after a dispute about a copy of their child's birth certificate. He also throttled a partner in 2014. And in 2015, he was jailed for whipping a girlfriend and grabbing her by her throat because she asked him to put something in the rubbish bin. He also had convictions for robbery. All of this was just a part of Marvin's history. During his murder trial, it took 15 minutes to read his entire record out aloud to the court. By the time Marvin was set free in 2016, he was already in a new relationship with Lilia. The pair had been introduced to each other by a neighbour of Lilia's, and they communicated by letters whilst he was incarcerated. They met in person for the first time in June 2016, a month after his release. Marvin never told Lilia the extent of his record or what offences he had been imprisoned for. All he told her was that he had been in jail for 8 months. Looking back, it's difficult to understand how such violent offences carried out over a long period of time would have only resulted in 8 months of prison time. But whatever the reason, Marvin was released from jail on parole and ordered to live at his sister's address. After meeting Lilia in person, he regularly stayed over at her house with Alex. She would later say that he was always very nice to her son and would offer to help him with his homework. What she didn't know then was the terms of Marvin's release, which included him being banned from having unsupervised contact with children under the age of 16 years old. After the death of her son, Lilia claimed that she had no idea about Marvin's history. She claimed that he had pretty relaxed arrangements with his probation officer and that he often cancelled or rescheduled his meetings, which made her believe that his previous offences must have been relatively minor. Lilia also asserted that she had never been told that he wasn't allowed to have access to children, despite Marvin telling his probation officer that he was in a new relationship. She didn't ask if I had any kids or if he stayed with me or anything like that. I heard how he spoke to her on the phone, and he was never forced to come to his appointments. I could see how lenient they were with him, and it never struck me that there were any serious issues with him. I think if it was something serious, from my point of view, they would have told me or just asked questions. Do you have any kids? That's just common sense. Lilia also met Marvin's family on a number of occasions. None of them told her about his history of violence or that he wasn't meant to be around kids either. There is also evidence that during Marvin's prior release, before he met Lilia, he used dating sites to target single mothers who had custody of their children. Even without knowing his history, Lilia denied that she ever had reason to believe that Marvin was dangerous, and she said she had never seen him hurt Alex. But when she went through Marvin's things after the murder, Lilia found a notebook he kept, which revealed his true feelings about her and Alex. I just remember finding the notebook. He was just really fake and manipulative and lying, and I just don't think he was nice to Alex behind my back. During Marvin's murder trial, jurors were shown further entries Marvin had written where he confessed he had been violent towards Alex in the past. In one entry written 3 months before the murder, Marvin wrote that he had beaten Alex because he had been sick in a taxi. The court also heard the differing statements Marvin had given in the hours after Alex was taken to the hospital. Initially, he told the paramedics that Alex had fallen off his shoulders. Then he said that the little boy had collapsed suddenly while they walked through the park. He also made Lilia give the police a statement to say that she had been with them during the walk through the park. It was only during further questioning that she broke down and admitted that Marvin had been alone with her son. On the witness stand, Lilia stated that she would never have entered into a relationship with Marvin if she had known his history. She had believed Marvin when he told her he was innocent of any crimes and that he had been wrongfully imprisoned. In her mind, the relaxed behavior of his probation officer seemed to corroborate his version of events. Lilia said that if she had found out about his history or violent temper after they started their relationship, she would have left immediately. Throughout the trial, Marvin never took responsibility for his actions and didn't express remorse for what he had done to Alex. The only defense he could offer was to say that Alex's injuries were accidental. He blamed a fall and a slip for the 22 injuries which were found on Alex's tiny body. When his excuses didn't seem to be working, he blamed the probation service for his actions. My probation worker did not do enough to help me settle down again. Why did my probation officer not inform Lilia? Perhaps, if she had, things would have been very different. He said his probation officer was aware of his temper and his issues with drugs and alcohol, and yet he had been allowed to basically do whatever he wanted, which led him to hurting Alex. Indeed, it was only after Alex's murder that the probation service admitted Marvin should have been paroled to a secure accommodation so his movements could closely be monitored. The reason they gave for this not happening was that there was a shortage of accommodation available. This was just one of the many systematic failures which enabled Marvin to have unchecked access to both Lilia and Alex. After a 2-week trial, 39-year-old Marvin Iannecho was found guilty of murder. The jury also made a point to criticize the probation service for their role in failing to advise Lilia of Marvin's history and therefore preventing her from protecting her child. Ultimately, he was sentenced to a minimum term of 18 years imprisonment. In his sentencing remarks, the judge dismissed Marvin's arguments that the injuries were all accidental and that his actions were anyone else's fault. Those injuries were caused by a fit of anger. It was a sudden and wholly unnecessary loss of temper which started outside the park gateway by a builder's yard. On this occasion, when the violence had subsided and you realized what you had done to the child, your thoughts turned not to helping, but to protecting yourself, trying to cover up what had just happened. This time, the consequences were more serious than ever before. You used your undoubted strength and simple brute force against the child. You were a stronger and overpowering figure. He was completely defenseless. The child had done nothing to justify any loss of temper, let alone a violent loss of temper. All the child was heard to say was in a soft voice, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." In the wake of the verdict, an inquest was held into the role the probation service played in Alex's murder. The final report identified a string of systematic failures. including failing to classify Marvin as high risk when he was released. The report noted that he was a manipulative, high-risk offender with a history of domestic violence who intimidated probation officers, and yet he had been released with minimal oversight of his movements. The inquest also found that changes to the probation service in 2014 had contributed to the murder. Former Justice Secretary Chris Grayling had cut fundings to the service, which meant there were significant issues with understaffing, high workloads, and ineffective information sharing between the different agencies involved in managing released prisoners. One of Marvin's probation officers was quoted in the report as saying, "Frankly, I was afraid of him. I think I was not sufficiently robust in challenging his behaviour." The report provided recommendations on urgent changes the system needed to undertake to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future. In the 3 years after Alex's murder, more than 1,300 probation staff in London attended specialist domestic and child safeguarding training. 180 additional trainee probation officers were also recruited to address issues with understaffing and unsafe workloads. After the results of the inquest were made public, Lilia stated, "I would really like to say that Alex didn't have to die for the system failures to be identified and for people to start to do their jobs properly. Alex was my heartbeat, and I miss him so much. He should be here right now, going to school, playing with his friends. Someone took this away from him for no reason, and the system meant to protect us did not. I now hope changes will be made." The final words of this story belong to the memory of young Alex and the mother who has to live with the guilt of knowing she opened her heart and her home to a monster. "I remember lying next to him in the hospital and praying that everything would be fine and that he would open his eyes. I didn't even get to tell him I love him. All I got was to put my hand on his chest and feel every single one of his final heartbeats. He was my world, and I'm so angry someone took this boy away from me. My son didn't deserve this. Everyone loved Alex. He had so many friends. He was my best friend too. He was caring, kind, and loving. He was perfect. He was smart, with so much potential. He was the first person to truly love me, and the one I loved."